Was José Chávez y Chávez really part Navajo? What about the stories of him living with the Apaches or having that big showdown with Bob Ford? Did that really happen? And what about Billy the Kid? How accurate was that scene in Young Guns 2 when he escaped from Lincoln? Did he really get the pistol from the outhouse, or did he simply overpower his guard? And who exactly killed Deputy Carlyle over at White Oaks? Was it Billy the Kid and Dave Rudaball? Was it Carlyle's own posse? Or was it a mixture of both? These are just a few of the topics I recently discussed with the great James B. Mills. If you're not familiar, James is the author of Billy the Kid, Bandido Simpatico, a book that I personally feel is one of the more definitive biographies on William H. Bonney. And James's new book, In the Days of Billy the Kid, covers several of Bonney's associates. Guys like the aforementioned José Chávez y Chávez, Juan Patron, Yginio Salazar, and the way underrated Martin Chavez. It's actually mind-blowing that Martin Chavez is not yet a household name, which you'll hear all about him in just a few minutes. And this really was a great conversation. Like I said, we'll get to it in a moment, but we talk about everything from the Society of Bandits to the Battle of Lincoln and who was actually in charge during the battle, whether or not Billy the Kid and Jesse James knew one another, the Cattle King John Chisum, and even the Whitecaps uprising. Now, before we get started, just a very quick disclaimer. You may notice that my head is down during a good portion of the conversation, and as such, it doesn't really appear as if I'm all that engaged, but I can assure you that was not the case whatsoever. I just had a couple of technical difficulties, namely with my prompter. So if you see me looking down, it's not out of boredom. That was just the only way I was able to view James was by looking down on my laptop. Also, I would like to ask you a favor, okay? As you listen to James and I discuss Billy the Kid and his various associates, if you have any additional questions you would like me to ask James, please sound off in the comments or shoot me an email at josh@wildwestextra.com. He has agreed to come back on, and what I'm hoping to do next time is more of a listener Q&A. So like I said, hit me with those questions and I will start compiling a list. All right, without further ado, let's talk a little Billy the Kid history with my favorite Australian, other than Isla Fisher, the great James B. Mills. All right, James B. Mills, welcome to the Wild West Extravaganza. Thank you for coming on. You have written what I consider to be like the definitive book on Billy the Kid. Nobody's perfect, right? But it is one of the more, it's one of the better of the modern books about Billy. I have not yet read your new book, In the Days of Billy the Kid, The Life and Times of José Chávez y Chávez. There you go. That's the cover. Juan Patron, Martin Chavez, and Yginio Salazar. What was it that made you want to revisit that era, that time, and take a closer look at a lot of the people that were surrounding Billy the Kid and some of the events that occurred after his death?
Well, first, I just want to say, man, thanks for having me on. It is greatly appreciated. A lot of authors who publish with university presses don't necessarily get that kind of promotion that the trade publishers do. So these kind of podcasts, you got a lot of followers, man. It's a great way to help, promote our work when you can get. So thanks for giving me a shot.
My pleasure.
What took me back there, man? When I finished El Bandido Simpatico, as you will read in the introduction to the new book, I already knew then that there was still another broader story that needed to be told. And I pretty much went straight from finishing the Billy Bonney book right into this new one, which I'm actually more proud of. I think the new one's better, in my opinion, but I mean, it's just my opinion, man. But I knew that there was a much broader history that needed to be told, and I wanted to center it around the lives of those four hombres, José Chávez y Chávez, Juan Patron, Martin Chavez, and Yginio Salazar. And the reason I wanted to center it around their lives was that it would provide me with the avenue to be able to write not just about the Lincoln County War, but far beyond that. And the narrative was able to take me from the 1850s all the way to the 1930s, because Yginio died in 1935. So, and those four hombres happen to be kind of in and around a lot of very interesting history. So the book starts with their upbringings, and Billy Bonney, he doesn't actually come into it. He doesn't show up until chapter 5. So, but when he comes into it, and you get the Lincoln County War, but before that you get the Harel War, in which Juan Patron's father was killed. And you also get some of the exploits of José Chávez y Chávez. Yginio Salazar was a cowpuncher for John Chisum, participated in the Pecos War. And of course, Martin Chavez, who was undoubtedly the most unjustly forgotten participant of the whole Lincoln County War. And as you'll see in the new book, he lived an incredible life. And it was able to take through the Lincoln County War and then Bonney's death. There's 18 chapters in the book. Bonney gets killed in chapter 11. So there's a lot more history after that to read. And then it goes through the 1880s, Martin Chavez starting to establish himself in politics, José Chávez y Chávez scaring the shit out of Robert Ford in Las Vegas at one point. Those two got into a little bit of a confrontation and also being a rather brutal city policeman. And then it kind of goes into the Herrera brothers, Juan José, Pablo, and Yginio Herrera, who were three brothers that led the Los Gorras Blancas, the White Cap uprising in San Miguel County. And that was an extraordinary event. The hooded night riders went around cutting down what had been illegally erected fences and on what was the Las Vegas land grant, which was legally public domain. And that transitioned into the People's Movement, which was a big political movement in San Miguel County, which is fascinating stuff. And all while that was going on, you had the Vicente Silva and the Society of Bandits, who were like a mafia family in the American West. José Chávez y Chávez was both a member of the Whitecaps and he was a member of the Society of Bandits. And Jose did some very horrible things in that crime organization. And of course, he got into big trouble for it, let's say the least. And then it continues on, the narrative continues on through to the early 20th century, the emergence of the automobile and the frontiers fading. And it gets to their later years, and Martin Chavez, who was actually the leader of the McSween partisans during the big siege, the big 5-day siege in Lincoln, the McSween fire, so to speak. Martin Chavez was the leader of their faction, and he went on to become one of the most esteemed, well-known businessmen in the entire state of New Mexico. Everyone across the state knew who he was. A former governor, James Hinkle, was a pallbearer at his funeral. That's how esteemed he became. And he lived an incredible life, and it's an incredible journey. And then, of course, you had authors like Walter Noble Burns coming to interview Martin and Yginio Salazar as well. And, Yginio, he's the last to die. But even there's a lot of new revelations in the book. Like I found, Yginio Salazar, it says on his headstone that he died in 1936. If you read the new book, actually he didn't. He died in January 1935. The death date on his headstone is wrong. So is the birth date by several years. So there's a lot of covers a lot of history, about 80 years worth of New Mexico history, primarily frontier history. And it was just a book I felt I just had to write because there was so much more. And I think the new book for the reader will put the Lincoln County War into a bit more of a broader perspective because people have kind of looked at that almost in a vacuum, like it was an isolated incident. But in fact, it was just one in a series of uprisings against the power structure in New Mexico. You had the Colfax County War, the Lincoln County War, then you had the Whitecaps and the People's Movement. It was all against the same corruption, the same people. And I think you'll come away from the book really understanding why the Hispanos of southeastern Nuevo Mexico, why they considered Billy Bonney a hero. He was a hero to them. They adored him. You don't have to agree with them. For the readers out there, you can feel differently if you want, but that's how they felt. And I think you read the book, you'll understand why.
A lot of fascinating history from New Mexico. The deeper I dive into it, it's just every layer I pull away, there's another 100 layers. And, even with something like the Lincoln County War, you take the Colfax County War out of the equation, just the Lincoln County War in and of itself, it can be very complicated to sum up just in a couple of paragraphs. I struggle. There's so much nuance in there. Now, I want to talk about a lot of that. Before we go any further, my audience is going to kill me if I don't ask a few questions about Chavez before we move on to some of the other guys. And, this kind of goes back into what you were saying about Martin Chavez, right? I got that name right. Yeah. Martin being a leader among the Lincoln County regulators. we're so conditioned to think of the Lincoln County regulators just being this tiny group of guys that used to work for Tunstall, right? When in
Mhm.
all reality, I'm not sure how many there were. Am I wrong to say that the majority of the regulators were Hispanic? I could have sworn I've read that there were upwards of like 60 of them.
At the end, towards the climax, the big
Yeah.
siege, yes, the majority were Hispanos, and there were roughly between 50 or 60 during that 5 day
Okay.
siege. Martin Chavez, who Alexander McSween and the regulators, Billy Bonney and all them, they rode to Picasso and asked him to take over as their leader, to come up with a strategy and be their leader during the siege, which he accepted. He
Mm-hmm.
was disgusted with what the Dolan faction had done recently in San Patricio. They'd ransacked the Placita and a number of other issues as well. And so he recruited about 20 local Hispanos, including his uncle-in-law, Vicente Romero, who was died alongside Alexander McSween in which I think Martin might have had to answer to his aunt-in-law when he got back to Picasso for that. But so yeah, there was toward the very end there was about between 50 and 60, and I'd say at least half of them were Hispanos.
Okay. 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 Something I've always been curious about. I've never been able to find a definitive answer. Is there any evidence whatsoever that Jose Chavez y Chavez was half Navajo, or even sometimes people will claim he was part Apache? Now, the caveat being that many Hispanic people, not just from New Mexico, but Texas, Arizona, California, you go back far enough in their lineage, and there was a lot of intermarrying from Spanish and Native Americans. I'm sure he did probably have Native American blood, but did he identify as being half Navajo? Did he grow up in that culture? Is there any like strong connection there?
No. As
Okay.
you said, he may have had some degree of First Nation, Native American, American Indian, whichever term you prefer. He may have had some degree of that blood in him through his ancestors, because there was a lot of
Hmm.
interracial relations. Uh, the fact is, his parents were both Hispanos, Nuevo Mexicanos. He was kind of a wannabe in that sense. He told George Curry that his mother was an Apache. No record of that at all.
Ah,
His mother is, I found not only his mother's name, but her parents, they were Hispanos. There's no
you have his
record.
baptismal record, right? You have
Pardon?
his baptismal record.
Yes, I found his baptismal record. He wasn't born in 1851. He was born in 1850. His full name, birth name, was Jose Teodoro Chavez. He was born in
Mm,
Cebolleta in 1850. So he was a year younger than we thought. But no, there's absolutely nothing to suggest that he had any Navajo, that he was half Navajo, or part
mhm.
Apache at all. He was,
Okay.
for all intents and purposes, just another Hispano. And he did tell a tale that he was kidnapped by mescaleros when he was a small boy, and that he lived with them for about 20 years. Uh, Jose Chavez y Chavez could tell a lot of tales. I found census records that completely kind of disproves that, because he was still living with his family when he was 10, and he was living in Lincoln County when he was 20. So he may have been kidnapped for a very brief period, but as for him
Yeah.
being living with the Apaches for years, as you'll know, having researched the rest, the American West, people who were held captive or lived with Native Americans for extended periods of time, they had a lot of trouble reassimilating when they were returned to their prior culture. Jose Chavez had no problem, becoming a lawman in Lincoln County. He, I actually start the book, the first chapter, with that. He used to tell people that he was Native American, but it appears to have just been. I think he was trying to make himself sound even more tougher, which is what Jose was
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
about. He was all about bad hombre.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what it's like in the land down under Australia, but here in the United States, there's a lot of people that love to say they're Native American without actually having any connection whatsoever. A lot of people who look just like me will tell you that their grandmother was a Cherokee princess, but
Oh yeah,
but
yeah.
you bring up Chavez being a lawman. We know he would eventually become a deputy in Las Vegas. What I didn't realize, and I think a lot of people are probably like me have no idea about this, he was at one point a deputy for Sheriff Brady, correct?
He
In Lincoln
was.
County.
He was prior
How
to the
did that
Lincoln.
how did that come to be? And At what point did he break with that faction and, link up with Billy and the regulators?
Well, I don't think he was ever actually a member of that faction, so to speak. I don't think he was ever involved with Jimmy Dolan and any of them, but he was commissioned as a deputy sheriff by William Brady, and he carried out some tasks as a deputy sheriff under William Brady in 1877. So there's some irony there. How he got that
Right.
job, he had proven himself a very good constable, local constable in San Patricio, which was his home Placitas. And he also, I believe, he was a lawman justice of the peace, I think, for a little while in what was left of Missouri Plaza, which was just south of the river. But yeah, when he joined up with Bonney and the regulators, that was actually pretty quick. I think what we have indicates he was probably the first Hispano to join up, which makes sense if you read the new book and you get a sense of his personality. He was always up for a fight, and I'd
Always
say
up
that
for it.
yeah, I'd say that he joined them up because he was just friendlier with that side than he was the other guys, and I don't think it was out of any loyalty. He never worked for John Tunstall. I'll put it that way. So
Right. Now, after the Lincoln County War, Jose joined up with a group known as the Lincoln County Mounted Rifles, which like I said, I haven't read your book yet, but I'm assuming they probably make a appearance. Can you
yeah.
tell me more about the Lincoln County Rifles? What were they doing? What was Jose's job? And who was the leader of the Lincoln County Mounted Rifles?
Well, all four hombres, whom the book is primarily centered around, they were all members of the Lincoln County Rifles. Jose, Martin, Yginio, and Juan Patron was the leader. That was Governor
Hmm.
Wallace's initiative. He was basically raising a county militia kind of deal to try to quell and capture some of the fugitives. And I don't think they posed much of a threat to Billy Bonney because I think he had too many friends that were members. Um,
Right.
and besides, he was trying to get his pardon anyway and sitting voluntarily in Lincoln for 4 months. But the Lincoln County, the Mounted Rifles, that was Lew Wallace's initiative. He commissioned Juan Patron to be the leader, and he recruited about 60 men. And their duties were to carry out arrests and to go after wanted men and things like that. And they weren't in existence for very long. They were disbanded, but they all saw some degree of action. The only way to get an idea of exactly how much was that you kind of look at how much each man was paid. Jose Chavez y Chavez got paid a lot more than Martin Chavez, so he probably did a lot more. But so yeah, that's what they were. They were kind of a county militia, I guess, unofficial law enforcement. And of course, the Dolan faction used to call them the governor's heel flies. That was their
Right.
nickname.
Now, were they, on paper at least, were they supposed to be going after
Yeah.
both sides that had committed? Okay.
Yes.
Now, something I've never understood.
They arrested.
Somewhere during this, oh,
Sorry,
I'm
I just
sorry, go
want
ahead.
to add. They arrested Doc Scurlock. They did get Doc. They went up to San Miguel
Okay.
County and got Doc Scurlock, and they brought him back to Lincoln. So yes, it was both sides. Sorry.
All right. Almost kind of like what you see in Young Guns 2 without New York City. Uh, were they tossing people in that pit jail, or was that already gone by that point?
uh, well, the pit jail was still there, but
Mhm.
Doc Scurlock was contained in the Patron store alongside Billy Bonney and Tom Foyett. Bonney had not been captured. Bonney voluntarily
Mhm.
came in and surrendered to Kimball in exchange, to sort out to testify against Dolan and them for Houston Chapman's murder in exchange for a pardon, which of course he never received. And Tom Foyett, which this shows you how loyal he was, he accompanied Billy into custody, even though there was nothing really detrimental against him. He sat with Bonney in the cell. Although Bonney did have permission, he was able to walk around town with his guns and to go visit friends as long as he always returned to the Patron store. So that's where Scurlock was kept. And a lot of the prisoners were actually kept locked up in Fort Stanton. So
Okay.
yeah. I don't know if many were held in the pit jail. I think they were kind of starting to move past the pit jail a little by that point.
Mhm. At some point during this time, I don't know any of the specifics. I've never been able to find out much information about it, but Chavez killed a prisoner or he killed somebody there in Lincoln, correct?
Yes, he
What
did.
was this in his capacity as a militiaman? Was he himself a prisoner when this happened?
No, this was after.
Okay.
We believe the prisoner was probably a young man named Harriman, although that can't be confirmed. But a young boy named Aristotle Aguayo, who was a resident of Lincoln and knew Billy Bonney as well. He and another young boy were playing marbles in the middle of Lincoln late one night, and this was in 1880. This was after the Lincoln County Rifles. And José Chávez y Chávez just came wandering up the street with a brand new rifle. And he said in Spanish to the boys, "Hello, boys, playing marbles, are you?" And walked past them, walked straight into the jailhouse. It might be worth noting that a very close friend of his, Florencio Chavez, who had also been a member of the regulators, was actually the jailer at the time. But José Chávez y Chávez just walked straight into the jailhouse. The boys kept on playing marbles, and the next thing they heard a gringo, a white guy, screaming in the jail. And they heard a couple of shots, and they heard Jose screaming in the jail, "No damn gringo can take my weapon and get away with it." And then he simply strolled out of there and walked back up the street. And the young boy's father saw Jose leaving town the next morning on horseback. So, but yes, he did walk into the jail and just shoot dead a prisoner and walk right out. So that was in 1880.
Yeah, I think it's so much of what we think about a lot of these figures comes from movies. And out of all the people, especially from Young Guns 1 and 2, I'm not sure if any of them differ more from their portrayal on the big screen than Chavez, because he was a legitimately scary guy, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. He was not the as I wrote in the new book. He was not the quiet, contemplative sage that is portrayed by
Right.
Lou Diamond Phillips. And that's not a knock on Lou Diamond
Right.
Phillips. I think he was
Oh.
just acting the role as my friend John Fusco, created for that film. And
Yeah.
but Jose was very boastful, and he makes Billy Bonney look like a box full of kittens. He really does. He was a ruthless, very aggressive, and he was a stone cold killer, especially later on as a member of the Society of Bandits in Las Vegas. He was a stone cold murderer. There's no way around it. And he ended up doing a lot of time in prison for it, and deservedly so, must be said.
You kind of hinted at this earlier, but is there any truth to the encounter he had with Bob Ford? Is that just apocryphal? I know they knew each other. They had to have known each other, but did they actually, did he actually challenge him to a duel?
Well, that story was passed down to historian Howard Bryan, and unfortunately, he didn't list an original citation. However, knowing the kind of historian Howard Bryan was, he would not have made that story up out of nowhere. Howard Bryan interviewed a lot of old timers who had lived in Las Vegas. He even interviewed Vicente Otero, who was one of Billy Bonney's pallbearers. He buried Billy the Kid, and he died in 1958, which means he buried the kid and he lived to see the emergence of Elvis, which is quite crazy when you think
It's
of that.
crazy to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, he was a very old man, and he even interviewed him. He didn't list an original citation for that encounter. I thought long and hard about whether or not to go with it. I did include it in the book simply because I can certainly buy it. Robert Ford and Jose were both members of that same police force at the same time. We do know that Robert Ford was in Las Vegas. Robert Ford got on a lot of people's nerves. He would have very easily got on Jose Chavez's nerves. So
Right.
I can't say for absolute certain that it happened, but nobody can say that it didn't either. The only way we're really going to solve that one is to build a time machine. So
I'm working on it. Just give me a couple more years. So how does Chavez go from being a constable there in Las Vegas to getting linked up with Vicente Silva, or was it simultaneously? Was he working for Silva? And would you mind kind of explaining who Vicente Silva was, how his organization worked, how mafia like it really was?
Vicente Silva was actually, have you heard of Jesus Silva, who was a friend of Billy Bonney's in Fort Sumner?
Yes, were they
Yeah.
connected?
He was his brother, younger brother, believe it or not.
Had no idea.
He
Wow.
was.
Wow. Okay.
Jesus Silva never mentioned it in any of the interviews he did. I think probably because he was ashamed. Vicente Silva was muy malo. He was a bad hombre, and he was a perverted gangster. And he would put on a very cordial act for a lot of the public, but man, he was poor. absolutely stone cold murderer, icy. And Jose Chavez y Chavez had been working as a lawman in Las Vegas for quite a while, I think before the Society of Bandits. He was not the only Las Vegas policeman who became a member. So there were a couple others, and they were burning the candles at both ends. I think Jose, he just wanted to get more money. And rather than run for sheriff or something like that, he just looked to organize crime. And the Society of Bandits were very kind of mafia-like in a sense. They were very tight-knit, and Vicente Silva ended up murdering his own wife. And that was after Jose Chavez y Chavez was one of the members who helped him murder his young brother-in-law, who was only 14 years old at the time. And that was an absolutely brutal murder. You'll read all about it in the new book. And that's what Jose was actually sentenced to prison time for. So
Is that the guy they found hanging?
No.
The guy
That was another
okay,
member
okay.
who that was on. You'll read that in the book too. But
All right, great.
I will say that the Society of Bandits, Vicente Silva in Las Vegas in the 1890s, you read about them in the new book. They leave, Al Swearinger in Deadwood, the series Deadwood. They leave that for dust, man. They were more so ruthless and so
Wow.
violent. It would make a great TV series. I've told John Fusco, who wrote the Young Guns films, I've told him, man, that's your next screenplay.
Yeah, I'm down for it, man. Well, so did Chavez, one of the theories, or I don't want to say theories, something that I've probably said before in the past, and I may not necessarily have the sources to. I probably shouldn't have said it confidently as I did. Did Chavez kill Silva? Was he one of the men who killed him?
No, doesn't appear to be so.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Okay,
Uh,
so he does end up going to prison for some murders he committed on behalf of Silva and the gang.
yeah.
A conventional thought is that he ended up getting an early pardon after he saved a guard during a prison riot.
He
Any
was
truth
not
to that?
pardoned. He was not pardoned. He was granted conditional
Oh,
parole.
okay,
There,
okay,
big difference. He was granted conditional
okay.
parole. There is no record of him actually. Josh Slatton, a friend of mine, who works
Mhm.
for the Billy the Kid Historical Coalition, he's never found anything. I couldn't find anything to say that he saved a guard. I did find a reference in a letter that suggests he
Mhm.
may have assisted the guards during a prison riot, but there's no actual record of him having saved a guard. I will say, as stone cold and ruthless a criminal as he was a model prisoner for all the years he
Mm,
was in there. And I do know, because George Curry, the governor, who granted him conditional parole, not a pardon, cited this
right.
when he did so, that Jose had been the prisoner who had been in charge of the ones working on the roads. So obviously
Mm.
he was obviously a model prisoner to that sense. But no, he was not
Same
given a
level of
pardon.
trust there then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Kind of switching gears here.
cool.
I do want to touch on the Whitecaps uprising here in just a little bit and a little bit
Yeah,
about Thomas Catron. But going back to Billy the Kid, like I said earlier, you've done so much great work with your biography on Billy, Bandido Simpatico. And by the way, I'm gonna, in case anybody is not aware of this, James Mills is the guy that found that interview with Billy the Kid in the Las Vegas jail, correct?
The Santa Fe jail. Yes.
Santa Fe jail, my bad.
Yeah,
Santa
you are
Fe
correct.
jail.
But
Santa Fe.
it was in the Santa Fe jail in early January. January was published in the
Did you just
January.
find that going through microfilm, or
No, Online archives. I was just searching. I came across it, and I thought, "What the hell? I don't remember this." And I read it through, and I was like, "Is it?" And I realized what I'd found. I was stunned, and I
I
went to my
bet.
friend Bob Bosbell, who works at True West Magazine, and I said to him and the editor Stuart Rosebrook, I said, guys, I think I found a previously unknown interview with the kid, and the kid talks in it, speaks. And they were kind of, I think they were a little, oh yeah, sure at first. And then I
Right.
messaged them again. I said, guys, I'm not pulling your leg. I'm going to send this to you. And when I sent it to them, they were stunned. Mark Lee Gardner was stunned. Everyone was stunned. And of course, they ran it in an issue of True West. That was actually my first ever feature with the magazine. That was way back in 2020. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
No, that's awesome, and it just goes to show that there's a chance we could always find out more information. There's no telling what's in a letter that somebody's got in their attic right now. You know, there could be stuff in old newspapers that just somebody hasn't found yet, like you did with that. Just going on the online archives. That's amazing, man. I'd like to get your opinion on a few things that we may not be able to prove conclusively, but just do all of your research. First one is, did Billy the Kid or Dave Rudabaugh kill Deputy Carlyle, or was it the posse?
uh, Sometimes, as much as it pisses us off, sometimes history comes down to simply to who you choose to believe. From what I've seen in all my years of research, I've seen enough to believe that it was the posse that accidentally killed Carlyle.
It was.
But again, it's kind of a time machine thing. You know, you can't know 100% certain. One possibility I think that people may not consider is that maybe Bonney and his guys and the posse both were firing, and even Carlyle was caught in a crossfire. We don't know. But from what we have, it does strongly suggest that that was a lot more to that than people knew, as Bonney himself told Pat Garrett. Bonney firmly denied it. He said he explained that Carlyle was killed by his posse. So probably the posse. That's the best way I can put it.
Okay. The alleged meeting between Billy the Kid and Jesse James. I'm assuming this is a lot like the showdown between Chavez and Bob Ford. I think there's a little bit of evidence that maybe it could have happened, but what's your opinion on it?
Do I really believe the two most famous outlaws in the history of the American West were having dinner at the Hot Springs Hotel 6 miles outside of Las Vegas in 1879, according to Dr. Henry Hoyt, who did know Billy Bonney and was friends with Billy Bonney and was a reasonably stand-up guy? Do I really believe that? No, but
Okay.
stranger
All
things
right.
did happen on the American frontier. So that's
There you go.
that's a kind of, it's, do you want to believe it or not? It's some people want to. I will say that my two rules for researching history and writing about history are, the rule number one is there is a difference between what you know and what you believe. In the new book, for example, I wrote, even in Bandido Simpatico, I wrote that Billy Bonney was probably born in New York. What we have strongly indicates that he in all probability was, but we don't have a birth certificate, so I can't write that definitively. So any author out there who is writing that the kid was born and raised in Indiana without an actual birth record to back that up, they're full of shit. I'm sorry, but they are. There's a difference between what you
Agreed.
know and what you believe. And the second rule is emotion is the enemy of facts. You can't get too emotionally invested in any theory you might have or want to believe. You have to keep a distance to judge things impartially. Did Bonnie and Jesse meet? Maybe, maybe not. That's the funny thing is, with both the Carlisle shooting and the Billy and Jesse thing in Bandido Simpatico, I left both those things up to the reader to decide for themselves. So that's my stance on it.
What are
I know
your
it's not a
thoughts
very
on Paco
sexy
and
answer.
Ea? Oh no, that's great, man. Those last two questions I gave you, I'm not sure if there is a definitive answer. You know, we can only go off of what evidence we have and
Yeah,
kind of make our own decisions, really.
that's
I'm
a
a
lot of
big fan of
history.
the word maybe
Yeah,
or alleged.
I mean, it's not from a lack of research, and it's not from a lack of study or and analysis or anything like that. It's
Mhm.
just sometimes history really does come down to who you choose to believe. If you believe the Cowboys
Yep.
at the OK Corral, the Earps opened up on them without provocation. If you believe the Earps, the Cowboys started the fight. Can we say for
Well,
absolute certain? Again, time machine, man, build one. Hurry up.
I'm working on it, bro. Just calm down a little bit, all right? Whew. A little hostile. No, I'm playing. So this
Um,
kind of tying into that and who we choose to believe. I'd love to get your thoughts on Paco and Ea. You know, there's always going to be like inconsistencies and contradictions in all of these eyewitness statements. A lot of what Paco said, and by the way, for anybody listening, Paco Anea was allegedly there at Fort Sumner when Billy the Kid was killed. A lot of what he said does differ quite a bit from what the other eyewitnesses said. You know, we've got the issue with the alleged second coroner's report. as far as I'm aware, Paco is the only guy who claimed that Billy's body was put on display in Beaver Smith's cantina. Everyone else said it was in the carpenter shop, to the best of my knowledge.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on Paco and these inconsistencies?
Well, Paco was a pretty old man by that time. It's perfectly natural that a man of his age would get some things wrong. He was very bad with dates and he was bad with time frames. And yet his recollections I consider immensely valuable because it's a window into the Hispano perspective of things in Fort Sumner. Now, Paco Anaya was a resident of that area at the time. That's documented in the census records and everything. So, yeah, it is viable that he was in Sumner the night Bonney was killed. And he also recalled witnessing Bonney shooting Joe Grant in self-defense in Sumner. And he also recalled watching Bonney accost John Chisum, so to speak. I'll say it. He stuck a gun in his mouth and steered him around the saloon and kicked him 3 times. But
That where he was demanding $500, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that, yeah. Bonney firmly believed that Chisum owed him money. Whether or not Chisum did, again, I don't know. But I don't think Bonney just dreamed that up out of nowhere. John Middleton kind of hinted that Chisum had kind of left them in the lurch. José Chavez y Chavez told Paco Anaya that Chisum had promised to pay them $5 for any horse or cow any stock that they brought in. So there's some hints there that the Bonney might have had a legitimate grievance. Then again, maybe he just wanted some money out of Chisum that he felt he was deserved. But Paco's, you have to be careful. You have to be cautious. You have to be cautious to a degree with a lot of those recollections, but Parco's do certainly have some value. As I said, he was bad with dates and timeframes, and he got some things wrong. I think Bonney told Parco a few tall tales to amuse him, and unfortunately, I think Parco kind of took them as real.
Right.
Because Bonney would do that. He'd, tell stories and make people laugh. And I think Parco kind of took some of that as a little too seriously. You can almost imagine Bonney kind of saying, oh, yeah, this is what, But
Right.
my opinion is they have some value, for sure.
Okay. You've said this a couple of times already. Tom Folliard. It's your opinion. There's no O on there.
There isn't.
Okay.
Mark Lee Gardner, I can't take credit for that. Mark Lee Gardner established that over a decade ago. His name was Thomas O, letter O, full stop,
right.
Folliard. Yeah. So
that
there is an
is
O, it's his middle name, whatever it was.
right.
But Mark Lee Gardner confirmed that years ago. And
Okay.
anyone out there to this day who's still calling it, writing him as Tom O'Fired, sorry, but you're making a mistake. Andrew L. Roberts was never known as Buckshot. Andrew L. Roberts was never known as Buckshot either. That was a fictitious name added in years later. That happens.
Okay. Yeah. Can you explain the the Whitecaps uprising? And can you kind of explain how that ties into some of the earlier conflicts like the Colfax and Lincoln County Wars?
Well, the seeds of that were planted when the railroads arrived in 1879. For some, that was a grand achievement and a chance for great prosperity. For a lot of the Hispanos, it was disastrous, especially the sheep herders and a lot of the working class farmers. What happened was you had the Las Vegas land grant, very sizable, which was legally public domain, public land for everyone to use. There are a number of people who started putting up fences on that public domain. And in doing so, and this was not just Angos as well, there were prominent Hispano farmers, ricos, who were doing it as well. And it was cutting a lot of Hispanos off from their water holes. It was preventing them from grazing their sheep where they'd been able to do it on public property for decades. It was even cutting kids from getting to school. It was cutting off some Hispanos from even getting to church. And a great resentment throughout the 1880s towards Thomas Catron. A lot of the corruption, the land corruption that was going on was steadily rising until eventually it all came to a head, and it really kicked in 1889 with the Herrera brothers, Juan Jose, Pablo, and Yginio, who are written about in the book. Fascinating guys. They led the Whitecap uprising, and they were a vigilante group basically who at night time they would wear white hoods white flour sacks with puncture holes to conceal their identities. They were fiercely secret, very secretive, and they would go around destroying fences. And they didn't go looking for bloodshed. They didn't end up having, a few people got wounded or something like that, but they weren't. And they burnt down a number of land grabbers' ranches. I will say they made sure they were empty before they burned them, so they didn't burn anyone alive. They considered themselves revolutionaries, and a lot of that was against the misuse of the Los Vegas land grant and the corruption coming out of Santa Fe and Thomas Catron and the Ring. And it became a full-scale uprising, and it was quite a fascinating period there for 18 months. And then the Juan Jose Herrera, who was the older of the three brothers, he decided then, they were going to take it in a political direction, and that became the People's Movement, which was the United People's Party of New Mexico, and they decided to take on the Ring and the corruption in Santa Fe that way. So, and it kind of went to politics, but that's the best summation I can give it. It's an unbelievably overlooked piece of New Mexico frontier history. I detail it all in the new book. It's incredible stuff. It really is. And I think there's not, to this day, there hasn't been a book, I think, like mine that actually really covers it from start to finish, that whole uprising. Yeah, remarkable stuff.
I'm excited to read it, man. We do get so focused on Billy the Kid, Jesse James, Butch and Sundance, but there's so many stories like this that most people have never heard of, that there's never been any books or movies made about, but it's every bit as fascinating, if not more so fascinating, but just nobody's gotten around to writing a book about it,
Well, even devotees of the history of the American West have never heard of the Herrera brothers. A lot of people in New Mexico, I think, have never heard of them. That's them there. That's, Juan Jose Pablo. Pablo's the one standing in the middle. The one with the beard is Nick and Rob. They were the three brothers who led the White Cap Uprising, and they were remarkable figures. Pablo Herrera is particularly interesting. He was kind of fiery, he could get a little stabby, so to speak. He got into a couple of knife fights, and of course, he ended up getting killed in Las Vegas in 1894, which that was considered very tragic among the Hispanos. But Juan Jose Herrera was very much a working class hero to the Hispanos as the leader, but of course he never openly admitted that. It was all, cloak and dagger, hush hush. But right. I will say, this is something I want to point out with the Whitecaps. They were not about ethnic hostility. They were as much against Ricos, against corrupt Hispanos, as they were against Anglo land grabbers. They were about class struggle. And they were I touch on a little bit, it was like a much smaller version of the Mexican Revolution almost. It was taking place in New Mexico decades before, of course, Pancho Villa and Zapata and all them came along. So, yeah, it's deeply fascinating. And anyone, I don't know, the Society of Bandits, which was going on at the same time where Jose was a member, it's incredibly fascinating stuff.
Well, when you did your research more into other guys that I admittedly don't know a whole lot about, like Martin Chavez, Juan Patron, even Yginio Salazar, one of the things that gets repeated about him a lot is that, well, what do they say? That he was like 14 years old at the Battle of Lincoln. Turns out that's not true, correct?
No.
He was, matter of fact, wasn't he probably either Billy the Kid's age or maybe even a little bit older?
Yeah, he was not the youngest regulator. He was 19, 20. Yeah. During the siege, Salazar. Tom Foyard was actually the youngest known regulator. He was the youngest. And there's a chance Yginio was actually a little older than Billy Bonney. Yginio Salazar has been thought of for decades now as like this naive waif, this kid who got caught up in everything. That simply wasn't true. Yginio was a tough scrapper, and he was involved in frontier violence before he even met Billy Bonney, and he was involved in frontier violence several years after the kid's death. He got into another shootout in 1884, tried to kill a guy. And then he became a lawman, actually, under John W. Poe. Yginio Salazar was a deputy sheriff under Sheriff John W. Poe. But Yginio was a tough hombre. He was a broad-shouldered guy, big guy. For some reason, people just think of him as being this little kid, this little youngster. He wasn't. Yeah, he was born in September 1859, and I know that because he filled that out as his own birth date in an insurance form that he filled out in his later years. So I think if anyone knew what
Okay.
Yginio Salazar's real birth date was, probably would have been him.
Probably either him or his mother. She ain't talking no more.
No, she was dead by that
Well,
time.
when you get into somebody like Martin Chavez, Juan Patron, what did you find the most compelling about these guys as you were doing your research?
Well, Juan Patron was a prodigy. He was an intellectual prodigy. He came from nothing and became an esteemed politician, very esteemed Hispano figure in New Mexico. There's so many admirable qualities about him. His downfall was that when he was a horribly angry and aggressive drunk. And now his drinking was not excessive, but unfortunately, when he did get drunk, he turned into a prick. And he got himself into hot water several times, got into several scraps, and of course, that's how he ended up getting killed by a Texas cowboy in Puerto de Luna in 1884, who that young man, Michael Maney, he shot Juan Patron in self-defense. He was not an assassin. Nobody had hired him or any nonsense like that. He was just a Texas cowboy who happened to be in the wrong place. But Martin Chavez, as I said, he's the most unjustly forgotten figure. He was the leader during the whole siege in Lincoln, the 5-day siege. He went on to do so many things. It was incredible. He just a life of public service, county commissioner. He sat on multiple commissioners, the Lincoln County School Board, so many things. He was a deputy sheriff, the deputy of Picasso for years. He was a lawman. He was justice of the peace, which almost cost him his life at one point. And then, of course, he relocated to Santa Fe just prior to 1920, became one of the best businessmen in all of Santa Fe, one of the most esteemed businessmen. There was talk of him potentially running for mayor of Santa Fe. He served on political committees. He served on a committee during the First World War. Extraordinary man. And it got to the point he was so esteemed that even his farming activities were reported in newspapers. There were reports on how Martin Chavez's crops were growing. This is how esteemed this guy was. And it got to the point where even him being somewhere was like reported. Oh, we were proud to have Martin Chavez in our city, last week or something. This is how esteemed he was. He became one of the state tax commission, which was the peak of his political career, so to speak. And he was very close friends with governor at the time, James Hinkle. And of course, James Hinkle, who was then a former governor of New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, he was a pallbearer. He helped carry Martin Chavez's coffin to the burial site. Martin, how on earth that man became so forgotten, I'll never know. But you will learn all about his extraordinary life in the new book. And I think everyone else will shake their heads because I spent 3 years piecing together his whole life from scratch because there had not been even one single article written about Martin Chavez. There's only been one article about him published. I wrote it. It was published in a recent issue of True West. So I had to piece all his life together, and I think the readers will think, they'll shake their head as much as me and think, how the hell did this guy become so forgotten? And he was one of Billy Bonney's closest friends. Him and Bonney were really tight. And so, yeah, those guys, so much history. I also found, as I wrote in the new book, that Juan Patron at one point, he actually traveled east to Kansas City, Missouri on an excursion not long after the railroad was established in 1879. Nobody knew about that. I didn't know about that until I found that, uncovered that stuff. There's a lot more history to, surrounding Billy. And of course, Billy Bonney does get a very good show in the book. He gets his own chapter at one point when Garrett's after him, and he gets covered, but mostly through the Hispano perspective. And here's something that hardly anybody knows. And you read about it in Bandido Simpatico, you'll read about it again in the new book. When Billy Bonney was being held in the Lincoln jail after Pat Garrett captured him, and he was taken to Santa Fe, went on trial in La Mesilla and was transported, he was in the Lincoln County Courthouse jail waiting to be hanged. A group of Hispanos in Picasso and San Patricio were steadily raising a posse, so to speak. They were going to ride into Lincoln and bust the kid out. They were not going to sit back and let him hang. And, of course, in the end, that wasn't necessary because the kid broke out of jail. He killed Bob and Ollinger and James W. Bell and rode out. That's an extraordinary thing, and I think that demonstrates how much the Hispanos loved him. The fact that they were planning,
Yeah.
they were not going to sit back and let the kid hang. They were genuinely planning. Scipio Sanchez was behind it, and he was actually a member of the McSween Partisans, the Regulators, during the Lincoln County War. He'd known the kid for years, and yeah, they were going to go bust the kid out. That's extraordinary. History could have been very different,
That
but
is,
of
man.
course, Bonney broke out
Oh,
himself.
can you imagine? Yeah, it almost reminds me of that story where the Jesse Evans had allegedly tried to send him a message to Billy the Kid to come bust him out from the custody of the Texas Rangers. It's just one of those, like, what if that would have happened? You know, it's just so interesting to think about.
If that
When you
happened,
talk a lot about,
sorry, I was just going to add,
oh,
if that did happen, and Bonney had received that message, he would have laughed his ass off. There's no way he was going to go save Jesse Evans. No way.
especially after the last little rendezvous
Yeah,
there in Lincoln, you
that
know.
wasn't going to happen.
Now, when you talk about somebody like Martin Chavez, or Martin Chavez specifically, how esteemed he was, especially later on in life, any connection between him and Pat Garrett? You know, Pat Garrett was, he was trying to make a name for himself later in life, obviously. Did they have did they work together? Did they hate each other? Is there any indication they had dealings?
Martin Chavez did not like Pat Garrett at all. Martin
Imagine that.
Chavez was very much on Team Billy. And he actually referred to Pat Garrett. He told Walter Noble Burns that Pat Garrett was a coward, which is not fair, because I know Pat Garrett was not a coward. So no, they were not friends. Martin Chavez did not like Pat Garrett at all. However, they were both selected at one point. This was only several months before Garrett died. They were both chosen by Governor George Curry, and they were both part of an excursion to a farmers' convention in what was then Indian Territory, Oklahoma. So they both did attend that event together. Martin was there, Pat Garrett was there. You read about it in the new book. So we don't know.
Makes for an
I don't
awkward
think
train ride.
Martin would have talked to Garrett. Hey?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very
So they did.
interesting, man. Yeah.
There was a little, but yeah, Martin Chavez did not like Pat. Yginio Salazar hated Pat Garrett. Again, he killed his amigo, Billy Bonney.
Yep. Yep. Scrolling over my notes real quick, man. I'll edit this part out.
No worries.
Dude, you just like, I'm torn between being selfish and just asking you questions I don't know the answer to, or just like, I'm trying to think, what is it I know my audience wants to hear about. Obviously Jose Chavez is such a well-known figure. Everybody loves hearing about him. Everybody likes hearing about the stuff like, did
Yep.
Jesse James and Billy the Kid meet? Did Bob Ford and Chavez have the showdown? Obviously, we talk a lot about Martin, Patron, Yginio. Who are some of the even lesser known people that are every bit as fascinating? That it's in that Billy the Kid universe, so to speak.
Well, there was
Even something like Deputy Bell, for instance. A lot of people don't realize that there's a good chance he was a fugitive at
He
some
was.
point.
He was a
Okay.
fugitive from Texas when Bonney killed him. James W. Bell had been involved in the murder of a farmer, and he had fled Texas. And so, yeah, he was literally a fugitive on the run for murder when he was acting as a deputy in Lincoln, and Bonney shot him. So Deputy Bell was not the innocent angel that history has often portrayed him to be. Bob Ollinger was a psychopath. Pretty much almost everybody felt that Bonney actually did Lincoln County a solid when he shot Bob Ollinger. But Pat Garrett even openly admitted that he was afraid to sleep around Bob Ollinger. But I
Yeah.
will say, if you're talking about a fascinating figure, there's one Bandido who I don't think anybody's heard. I write about him in the new book. There's a photo of him actually in the new book that had never been published in a book before. His name was Porfirio Trujillo. And I'll show the readers there. That's him there. That's when he was in prison. He was a member
Okay.
of Los Bolas Blancas, and he was also very much an independent bandido. He did 4 stints in the penitentiary, in the Santa Fe penitentiary. He got sent there again and again and again and again. He kept coming out. He'd commit a crime. He'd get sent back. It's almost comical. And he was a very, very rough hombre. But learning about him, and I don't think anyone had heard about him, Porfirio Trujillo, fascinating guy. And his death, there's a bit of mystery about that. He was killed in 1902. His body was found lying in a plaza of Little Placita where his lady friend lived, and a local carpenter spotted him lying there back like this, and he thought, he just passed out drunk the night before. Well, when they found him, actually somebody had sunk an axe into the base of his skull the previous night. To this day, we don't know who did it because I don't think there was that much of an investigation. I think a lot of people were glad to be rid of him because he was a pretty rough, very rough bandito. But yeah, so that's someone who was fascinating. And there was a bandito in Lincoln County who Yginio Salazar, when he was a deputy sheriff, actually helped escort to Santa Fe to trial, Nicholas Aragon. He killed a couple of John W. Poe's deputies, and Poe went after him pretty strongly. And so he was another. There's some interesting outlaws out there that are a lot lesser known.
Once again, my time machine is not yet complete. In your opinion, this is only your opinion, where did Billy get the pistol? Was it in the outhouse? Did he fight with Bell, pull it away from him? Did he run up the stairs to the armory?
The pistol was Bell's.
Okay, so
Bonney won Bell over the head twice. This is from my years and years of extensive research. The conclusion that I've drawn based on everything we have, Arkham's razor often applies. We do know for certain that James W. Bell had 2 gash wounds on his head from where Bonney had clobbered him. Now, if Bonney had retrieved a pistol from the privy, why bother hitting Bell? Just turn around and shoot him, or turn around and tell him to put his hands up. Doesn't make sense. My conclusion is Bell had let his guard down, which Pat Garrett had warned him and Ollinger not to do. He later referred to them both as fools. He said, I told those fools not to take an eye off him. Bell let his guard down as they were going back up the steps. Bonney turns around, bam, bam, they tussled. Bell's gun spilled out of its holster as they were tussling. Bonney dived on the floor and retrieved it, pointed it at Bell, told him, I don't know the exact words, told him to put up his hands. Bell instinctively tried to run. Bonney fired, caught Bell through the side. Bell stumbled out the back of the courthouse and died. Then Bonney, of course, grabbed Ollinger's shotgun and waited for him to come back down. And I've said this before, that's the conclusion I've drawn from years of research into it. That's the most logical for me. But I will say it goes back to there's a difference between what you know and what you believe. The simple fact is there is only 2 people in the history of planet Earth who knew exactly what went down and how inside that courthouse. That was Bonney and Bell. We can't ask them. So, I mean, not without a heater and some serious smelling salts. That's a good little hunting one. But so, yeah, but based on what we do have, that's indicates to me that's in all probability how it went down.
Right. I'm not a historian. I tell people I'm a dummy with a microphone. That's all I am.
Enthusiast.
I try. I'm an enthusiast. There you go. I do try to be very careful when I say this definitely happened versus this is my opinion of what happened, or like I said earlier, allegedly is one of my favorite words. With Billy the Kid, there's just so much stuff that we don't know for a fact. What is kind of your take when you're doing research? You've got what I would call like the primary sources, right? Like for instance, the Santa Fe jailhouse interview that you were able to locate. That's a pretty good source on Billy the Kid. We are getting the words straight from him. How do you view other stories that are more secondhand, third hand? For instance, when we look at everything we know about Billy the Kid, all of the primary evidence, the primary sources, eyewitness accounts, how do you then handle the other stories from people that are like, okay, my grandfather, his uncle knew Billy the Kid, and this is what he said. Even though we have no way of corroborating that, we have no way of proving that this person's grandfather's uncle knew Billy the Kid. How do you, I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do you choose what evidence is more important or more valid?
Well, the recollections that are more important and more valid are those who come from people who we know were actually there and were living, at least at the very least, were living in the vicinity at that particular time. You get a lot of wild claims out there from people who, my great, blah, blah, blah. that kind of stuff, basically, the job to really do that is mostly ignore it, because it's not a viable source. George Coe, for example, I don't doubt that, he misremembered a few things in his memoir, Frontier Fighter, but the fact of the matter is he was there. He rode with the regulators. He slept and ate and fought alongside Billy Bonney. He was there. The Cowboys were there. Martin Chavez was there. Yginio Salazar was there. José Chávez, they were there. So getting the accounts from people like Sally Chisum, we know that she was there. Pablito Maxwell, who was Bonnie's querida, his girl, we know that she was there. But if you start giving any real credence to just random people out there who say, "Oh, my great grandfather," yeah, okay, yeah, sure, okay, have fun with that. You can't really give that too much time, or you'll end up getting led down some kind of ridiculous rabbit hole. You have to really try and just stick with the closer the sources. A second-hand account, I'll give it maybe a little bit. Most third-hand accounts, I don't give much credence at all. I prefer the first-hand ones, as in first-hand recollections from people who we actually know were there.
Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on. I want to give the name of your most latest book, In the Days of Billy the Kid, The Life and Times of José Chávez y Chávez, Juan Patron, Martin Chavez, and Yginio Salazar. People can find that everywhere they find books. There's a beautiful cover up
Amazon.
there.
Go on Amazon.
Amazon. Okay, you want to go through Amazon, not your website.
Well,
do you have a website?
No, I don't actually have a website. I have a Facebook page, but I don't have a website.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So if
I
anybody
use
wants
Facebook.
to reach out, they can find you on Facebook, huh?
Oh, geez, what did I say that for? Yeah, if they want to, they can look me up on there. But yeah, I get a little overwhelmed sometimes when I have people contact me. I mean, it's okay. It's part of being an author, I guess. But I'm pretty quiet kind of guy. But yeah, I guess if they really want to ask me a question or something, yeah, they can do it that way. But they can go on Amazon and order a copy of the new book. And it's been pretty. I'm not going to sound like I'm boasting here, but I mean, it's been pretty well received, I think, from other historians at least. So, yeah.
I've heard a lot of great things,
readers.
man. And I definitely know how good Billy the Kid El Bandido Simpatico is. So, yeah, I'm very excited for this. Are you working on your next book yet?
This is for off air. This is just between you and me.
And that's pretty much where we started to wrap things up. From there on, the conversation just sort of devolves into me pestering James for advice when it comes to writing and publishing. But like I said earlier, he does want to come back on the show. And James is such an amazing resource when it comes to Billy the Kid. I know I've said this before, but not all of us are able to read all of the books on Billy the Kid, right? I've got a stack of books solely devoted to Billy the Kid. This is just a portion of them, okay? What else? Got more right here. More right here. Somewhere. Here. Got another one here. Another one here. So you see what I'm saying, right? There's a lot of material out there on Billy the Kid, and what you just saw is a fraction of what James had access to while he was doing his research. In other words, there are very few people on planet Earth who know as much about Billy the Kid as James B. Mills. So, that being the case, I would like to do a listener Q&A for his next appearance. If you would like to submit a question, just drop it down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or you can email me directly at josh@wildwestextra.com. Big thank you again to James Mills for gracing us with his presence. Make sure you pick up a copy of his new book, In the Days of Billy the Kid, The Lives and Times of José Chávez y Chávez, Juan Patron, Martin Chavez, and Yginio Salazar. I've already ordered mine, so it should be here in just a couple of days. And while you're at it, you might as well pick up a copy of James's other book, Billy the Kid, Bandido Simpatico. It really is what I would consider to be one of the more definitive biographies on the kid. And here, I got it right here. I don't have the cover on it anymore, but as you can see, this thing is massive. Just like my penis. Look at this bad boy, right? I guarantee that you will learn something new and maybe even walk away with a different perspective regarding the kid's life. I know I have. And I know for a fact that I'm going to learn a lot more new stuff in the days of Billy the Kid. You can find both of these books on Amazon, and I will drop links down below in the show notes. But yeah, I guess that's about all I've got for today. Once again, a huge thank you to James B. Mills, and thank you for joining us. Until next time, adios.